Resident Evil Requiem represents both a reckoning and a remembrance, a game designed to look back at nearly 3 decades of survival horror while pushing the franchise into its next era. As the 9th mainline entry in Capcom's legendary series, Requiem is not simply another outbreak, but a thematic culmination of everything Resident Evil has been building towards since 1996. The franchise began with isolation and fear, a handful of people trapped in a mansion, surrounded by the consequences of human ambition and biological experimentation. Over the years, Resident Evil evolved dramatically, shifting between survival horror and action, between slow-burn dread and bombastic spectacle. From the fall of Raccoon City to the global bioterrorism crises of later entries, the series gradually expanded its scope, while sometimes drifting away from the intimacy that made it terrifying in the first place. With Resident Evil 7 and Village, Capcom began pulling the series back toward horror, grounding its stories in personal trauma and psychological unease. Resident Evil Requiem continues that trajectory, but this time, it brings the past with it. Set decades after the destruction of Raccoon City, Requiem returns players to the physical and emotional ruins of where everything began. The city may be gone, but its scars remain, buried secrets, abandoned experiments, and unanswered questions left behind by Umbrella's collapse. This setting is more than nostalgic, it's symbolic. Raccoon City represents the moment humanity lost control of its creations, and Requiem asks what happens when those consequences are finally confronted head-on. The story unfolds through 2 protagonists whose journeys reflect the dual identity of the series itself. Grace Ashcroft, an FBI technical analyst, embodies vulnerability, investigation, and psychological horror. Her story is deeply personal, shaped by loss and unresolved trauma connected to the outbreak's legacy. Playing as Grace emphasizes tension over power, limited resources, evasive gameplay, and the constant feeling of being hunted rather than heroic. Through her, Requiem channels the spirit of classic Resident Evil, where fear comes not from overwhelming enemies, but from knowing you're never truly safe. In contrast stands Leon S. Kennedy, one of the franchise's most enduring characters and a living witness to its history. First introduced as a rookie cop during Raccoon City's collapse, Leon now returns as a seasoned federal agent, older, more experienced, and burdened by everything he survived. His presence ties Requiem directly to the original outbreak, grounding the narrative in continuity rather than reinvention. Leon's gameplay leans more toward action, offering a sharper edge to combat and pacing, but it never fully abandons the tension that defines the game's tone. Together, Grace and Leon represent 2 sides of Resident Evil: survival and confrontation, fear and resolve. Gameplay in Requiem reflects this balance. Capcom blends classic survival mechanics with modern flexibility, allowing players to shift between first-person and third-person perspectives. This choice reinforces immersion while letting players experience horror on their own terms, whether through claustrophobic, up-close terror, or a broader cinematic view of unfolding chaos. Powered by the RE engine, environments are dense with detail, decay, and atmosphere, turning every hallway, street, and interior into a potential threat. The villains of Resident Evil Requiem continue the franchise's tradition of body horror and moral corruption, but with a stronger psychological edge. Rather than purely monstrous antagonists, the game introduces figures whose obsessions and ideologies echo the sins of Umbrella, individuals who see catastrophe not as failure, but as opportunity. These enemies feel less like random mutations and more like deliberate evolutions of the series' long-standing themes: control, sacrifice, and the cost of playing God. Ultimately, Resident Evil Requiem feels exactly like its title suggests, a funeral hymn for the past and a warning for the future. It honors the series' origins without being trapped by them, weaving legacy characters, familiar locations, and classic horror design into a modern, cohesive narrative. More than just another sequel, Requiem stands as Capcom's statement that Resident Evil is not done reinventing itself, but it will never forget where the nightmare began.